What if your own government decided you were already dead and never told you? That question is not hypothetical. Right now, in a region of eastern Ukraine called the Donetsk pocket, approximately 100,000 Russian soldiers are trapped. And the most chilling part is not the trap itself. It is what Moscow has quietly decided to do about it. If you are new here, hit subscribe and smash that like button right now, because this channel covers the stories that mainstream media glosses over and shares it with people who deserve the full picture. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really happening in this war. Let us go back to the beginning, because to understand what is happening right now, you need to understand how these soldiers ended up there in the first place. Wars are not lost in a single moment. They are lost through a series of decisions. Some made under pressure, some made out of pride, and some made because the people in charge believed the situation was more under control than it actually was. The Russian military's presence in the eastern Donetsk area followed a pattern that has repeated itself multiple times during this conflict. Russian forces pushed forward aggressively. They extended their supply lines beyond what those lines could reliably support. The logistics began to crack, and Ukraine, watching carefully, identified the gaps and moved to exploit them. The result was an encirclement, a pocket, a situation where approximately 100,000 soldiers found themselves cut off from the main Russian force, unable to receive adequate supplies, unable to retreat cleanly, and dependent on a command structure that was, at least in theory, supposed to come save them. That was 31 days ago. In those 31 days, something has been happening that you will not read about in any official Russian statement. You will not find it in a Ministry of Defense briefing. The Kremlin has not issued any order that says what I am about to tell you, but the decision has been made. It is visible not in what Moscow has said, but in what Moscow has done, and more importantly, in what Moscow has chosen not to do. On the first day of the encirclement, the soldiers inside the pocket were receiving approximately 45% of the minimum supplies they needed to function. Not comfortable, not ideal, but survivable in the short term, with the expectation that relief would come. Today, 31 days later, that number has fallen to 18%. Let that sink in for a moment. 18% of minimum requirements, not 18% of what they would want in an ideal situation. 18% of the bare minimum needed to keep a military unit functional. That is not a supply problem. That is not a logistics delay. That is slow starvation, a force being kept just barely alive enough to hold position, but not fed enough to defend itself effectively, and certainly not supplied enough to justify the enormous cost of a rescue operation. And that is exactly the point. Because here is what military planning actually looks like when a force is encircled. The command above the pocket has a brutal calculation to make. On one side of the equation, the cost in resources, personnel, ammunition, engineering support, and time required to break through to the trapped force and bring them out. On the other side, the probability that the rescue will succeed and the value of recovering those soldiers if it does. When the numbers on one side stop working, the institution makes a decision, not with a press conference, not with an announcement, with silence, with resource allocation that flows away from the pocket and toward other sectors, with counter-battery artillery that goes to the front lines where Russia is still advancing, not to the corridors that would need to be cleared for a rescue column to move through, with engineering equipment, with the bridging units, the mine-clearing vehicles, the road-building assets, that is deployed elsewhere, to places where the command believes it can still make a difference. Here is the specific evidence that makes the abandonment undeniable. Russian artillery across the eastern theater has been allocated to sectors where forces are still pushing. That makes sense from a cold military standpoint. But a rescue operation aimed at the Donetsk pocket would require enormous amounts of counter-battery fire, artillery used to suppress Ukrainian guns, that are pre-aimed at every road and open field along the relief route. That support is not pre-positioned, it is going elsewhere. The second piece of evidence is engineering. Breaking through a fortified line, which is exactly what Ukrainian forces have been building for 31 days, requires serious assets, route clearing, bridging over destroyed crossings, obstacle removal through minefields. Ukrainian reconnaissance has been watching the areas where a rescue force would logically stage. Those areas show none of the engineering preparation that would precede a serious rescue attempt. The equipment is not there. The third piece of evidence is the nature of communications between the higher command and the soldiers inside the pocket. When a command is planning a rescue, the communication between headquarters and the encircled force has a specific character. It is operational, it is detailed, it is synchronized with timelines and preparation stages. The communications coming from the Russian command level, as monitored by Ukrainian signals intelligence, do not have that character. They have the character of a headquarters managing a deteriorating situation. Not one working to reverse it. 3 indicators, all pointing in the same direction. Moscow is not coming. Now here is what makes this story more than just a military analysis. It becomes something deeply human. The soldiers inside that pocket do not know officially what has been decided. No commander has stood before them and said the words. No message has come through the radio. But something is happening inside that pocket that military historians recognize immediately. The language of the soldiers is changing. Over the past 10 days, and the communications picked up, the soldiers inside have stopped asking as often about when relief is coming. The confident statements that said help is on the way are becoming rarer. They are being replaced by more vague language. Language that does not commit to specific expectations. Language that does not repeat the promises that command gave them weeks ago. This is not random. This is what happens when human beings begin to process a reality that has not been officially told, but has become impossible to ignore. The gap between what they were told and what is actually arriving, in terms of food, ammunition, and medical supplies, has grown wide enough that the mind adjusts, even before it is ready to fully acknowledge what it is adjusting to. They are not being told they have been abandoned. They are figuring it out on their own. And that process, the slow, quiet, painful process of figuring it out, is already underway. Before we go further, I want to pause here and ask you something directly. If you have watched this far, you understand that this story is bigger than a battlefield map. It is about institutions, decisions, and the people who live inside those decisions without the truth. If that kind of analysis matters to you, do something unusual right now. Do not just like this video. Go leave a comment below and tell me what you think Moscow's next move is. And while you are there, share this video to one group chat or one person who follows this conflict. The algorithm rewards engagement, but these conversations deserve to reach further than they usually do. Now let us talk about what this decision tells us about Russia's military position. The abandonment of 100,000 soldiers is not just a human tragedy. It is a strategic signal. And it is one of the clearest signals we have seen in this entire conflict. Healthy military institutions do not write off large formations. That is not a moral statement. It is an operational one. When a military has adequate resources, it commits them to rescue forces. Not just because of loyalty or morale, though both matter, but because 100,000 soldiers, even partially recovered, represent enormous operational value. They are trained and have experience. They can be reorganized, resupplied, and redeployed. Recovering them is expensive, but the return on that expense is real. The only circumstance in which a command concludes it cannot justify the cost of recovery is when resources have become extremely scarce. A situation where every remaining asset must be rationed with extreme precision. A circumstance in which the arithmetic of allocation no longer produces answers that allow for rescue, only answers that choose between bad and worse. That is the circumstance Russia is in. The Russian military is not making this decision from a position of strength. It is making it from a position where the demand for resources has outpaced the supply. It has reached the point where abandoning a major formation becomes the rational choice. That is a profound deterioration. It does not reverse quickly through military means alone. And what we are watching is an institution that has shifted from fighting to win into managing losses. The resources that remain are being directed not toward reversing the trajectory of the conflict, but towards slowing down the consequences of a trajectory that has already been set. That is a fundamentally different kind of war, and it has different implications for how this ends. But there is another layer to this story that goes beyond the current battlefield situation, and it is the layer that, in my assessment, carries the most long-term weight. Every Russian soldier currently serving on that front is watching what happens to the 100,000, not through official briefings, but through the informal networks that soldiers have always used. Through phone calls, messages, and conversations between units to share information leadership won't. Through the distributed social knowledge that develops whenever there is a gap between words and reality. And what they are learning is this: when the arithmetic turns against you, they will not come for you. That lesson, once absorbed, changes behavior, not immediately, not loudly, but fundamentally. A soldier who believes his command will exhaust every resource to bring him home will accept risks. He will hold a difficult position. He will fight when the rational calculation might say, run. He will trust the institution with his life because he believes the institution will guard that trust, take that belief away, or even weaken it significantly. And the entire risk calculus shifts. The soldier is still there, still has a weapon, and is still under orders. But the calculation is different. And over time, across hundreds of thousands of soldiers, that difference accumulates into change. It changes what an army can and cannot ask its people to do. This is the strategic cost. It does not appear on any battlefield map. It cannot be measured in kilometers gained or lost. It cannot be counted in equipment destroyed. It lives inside the minds of every soldier paying attention. They are updating their internal model of what they can expect from the institution that sent them. Military history is full of turning points that did not look like turning points at the time. Battles that shifted something fundamental in the relationship between an army and its soldiers. The eastern Donetsk pocket may be one of those moments, not because of territory alone, but because of what it communicates silently through behavior to every soldier in uniform. The message is not written anywhere, but it is being received. I want to close with this plainly. Those 100,000 soldiers are real people. They are not a strategic indicator or a data point. They are human beings who left their homes and were told that their country had a plan. They are now discovering slowly and painfully that the plan did not include bringing them back. Whatever side of this you stand on, that reality is worth sitting with for a moment. 100,000 people piecing together the truth through the gap of what was promised. The institution that made that decision will not call it an abandonment. It will call it a reallocation, a strategic adjustment, a prioritization of resources toward sectors that can produce results. The language will be clean and managerial. It will not include the word abandoned. But the soldiers inside the pocket do not need the word. They understand. The silence is loud enough. And the soldiers watching from outside will carry that understanding for the rest of this war. Into every difficult position, every high-risk order, every moment when loyalty points elsewhere. What they decide in those quiet, individual moments will shape this conflict more than any battle. Wars end through military collapse, exhaustion, or the slow erosion of belief inside an army. What Moscow has done through the simple language of resource allocation may have accelerated that erosion. It is a change that cannot be reversed by a press conference or a battlefield success elsewhere. The 100,000 soldiers are the headline, but the real story is the 800,000 soldiers watching them. What those people conclude about the unspoken deal with their country determines how this war ends. The most important developments are rarely on the front page. They are the quiet moments of character. Moscow has been silent about the Donetsk pocket. That silence is the decision. And now the decision is rippling outward in ways that no one in Moscow can fully control. History will record what happened to those men, but the soldiers still fighting are making calculations. They are updating their understanding of what they signed up for. Those determine tomorrow. If this video gave you context you did not have before, I want you to do one thing right now. Think of one person who would understand this story, someone who cares about the human cost. Send them this video directly, not a link on a feed, directly. These stories deserve to reach people. That is the kind of audience this channel is built for. The war is not over yet. But what happened in the Donetsk pocket has already changed something. Pay attention to see it.